Does anybody have any questions about anything that we are studying or any of the procedures of the class? I will, of course, be here for a few minutes afterwards, so if you have something you want to talk about after class, that's okay too. And you can always chat to me in private if it's something that you don't want to talk to anybody else about. Many times I find that the questions that students ask are questions that other people want to ask but are too shy to do so. All right, it's 12:30, so I wanted to show you where we are right now. What you should see on the screen is the class menu system. And if you notice, there are now 3 dark brown squares. And we have the yellow square as in development, which is what we'll be studying this week. And we will finish biopsychology today and start on the development chapter. And what is due this weekend is the Unit 3 material, quiz and discussion for September 12th, that's Saturday, but also on September 13th, Sunday, test number 1 is due. And test number 1 will be 30 questions, 15 from the history and science, and 15 from biopsychology. They are taken from a pool, so no test is the same. Nobody has the same test. There are about 60 questions that I pull from to take the 15 questions for your particular test. And the questions are very similar to the quizzes, but not exactly the same as the quizzes. So be sure to read the whole question and all the answers as well. Although you may see an answer that looks like the right one and jump on that answer, another answer could be also correct, and then there's a correct answer called A and B or C and D, something like that. So be sure to watch and be very careful of their questions and answers on the tests. The test is available now on Tuesday. It became available, I think, right away at the beginning of the day, about 12:05 this morning. And it will go offline on Sunday night, 11:59, just before Sunday becomes Monday. So you have to take it between now and then. Don't wait until the extremely last minute because you have 30 minutes to take the test, 30 questions in 30 minutes. But if you wait until 15 minutes before it goes offline, you'll only have 15 minutes left. So be sure to take it at the very least, by 11 o'clock on Sunday night. But it is available right now. If you feel comfortable taking it, you can take it right now. There's one chance to take it, that's it. And when you start it, it is finished 30 minutes later. So you can't pause it and then come back to it. The time keeps running. And that's the same on all tests. And all tests will be 2 chapters each. So you have the first 2 chapters on this test. And if you see right now, the test number 2 comes after memory and development because those are the 2 that will be on the next test while we're working on the consciousness chapter, states of mind. So that's the way the class works. This is our first test coming up. And remember that 2 bad tests will be thrown out. And that includes the final and the outcomes measurement as well, which is another test. But the lowest 2 scores will be thrown out. And that is a little confusing to my courses, the software. The software doesn't understand that. So it automatically throws out the first test because it's the lowest test. And then it'll automatically throw out the second test, which is the second lowest test. And then when you hit the third test, then it's going to figure out which one is the highest of those 3, and it'll show you finally show you a score on tests. But you won't actually see the test scores enter into your percentage until after the 3rd test. Okay. Is that clear to you guys? Because a lot of students wonder about why they're not seeing their test grades in their score, okay, good. You won't see that until the third test, because the first two are your lowest test scores, even though they may be 100, but they're still the lowest out of the only one test. It's still the lowest two. So it'll be more plain to you when you actually take the test and don't see the score on it. Any questions about that or anything else? Okay, I'm seeing no's. All right then. Let me bring back up our share for biopsychology, and there we go. This is where we ended last time. And we were talking about the different aspects of the brain, the fact that we have a motor cortex, which is in the frontal lobe, along with Broca's area, the two major areas of the frontal lobe, although the area just in front of the eye is called the prefrontal cortex, and that is involved in controlling our limbic system, which is our emotions, and also making judgments. And it is not fully integrated and fully myelinated until about the age of 18 to 21, which is why we say 18 to 21 is an adult, because at that time you can make very good judgments and control, most people can control their emotions. The somatosensory cortex in the parietal lobe, the auditory cortex is in the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe is for sight. And this is I've also talked about the pons medulla and the cerebellum, as well as the reticular formation, which is right behind the medulla and the pons. This is, you see the lobes of the brain. But what you're seeing is the lobes of the left side of the brain, not the right side of the brain. Remember, the right side does not have the auditory cortex in it, unless you're a woman, and women have an auditory cortex on the right side where men do not. A question that could be given to you, and that is one that a lot of biologists like to, biology teachers like to test you on, is how many lobes are there in the brain? How many lobes do you think there are in the brain? I'm not seeing any answers in the chat box. It's just a number. How many lobes are there in the brain? Take a guess. 4 is the perfect response that almost all beginning biology students make, and it is 4. 4 is correct for the left side. But what about the right side? It also has 4 lobes, and the two brains are very much different. And so you have 8 lobes altogether, 4 on each side. Don't let your biology teacher fool you on that one, okay? So the left side and the right side are different. And this is called the lateralization of the brain. There's actually 2 different brains in your head. How is the brain different on the left and right side? Well, the left side of the brain is more responsible for hearing and speech, even though women do have some on the right side. And the right side of the brain is mostly involved in spatial and visual activities. But there are very specific differences as well that we found in the left and the right sides of the brain as well. And this is called the lateralization of the brain. The left hemisphere is different than the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is more responsible for spontaneous speaking and spontaneous writing. The right side of the hemisphere is repetitive but not spontaneous speaking. So I'm sure that you know people who are really good at debate. That's spontaneous. That's the left side. The right side, I know you know people that are good actors, and they memorize their work and then they repeat it over and over again. That's repetitive speaking, not spontaneous speaking. And so actors are more in their right side for this, and debaters are more in their left side. Is that kind of cool? That you can tell a person's brain mechanisms just by what they're doing. Now, you might be an actor and like the repetitive side where you just repeat the information that you've learned, but you also might be very good at responding to complex commands. which is the left side. So a lot of people say we're either left brain or right brain, and that's not correct. We may be left brain in one particular area, but we might be right brain in a completely different area. And the left and right brains do different things, as you see here. Responses to complex commands on the left side, responses to simple commands on the right side. Word recognition is on the left side, facial recognition on the right side, and there is something called facial aphasia, where the right side of the brain isn't working properly and a person cannot recognize faces. One very famous medical doctor, neuroscientist, he was married for many, many, many years, and if his wife and a few of her friends walked into a room, he could not tell which one of them was her because he had facial aphasia. He couldn't tell by her face who she was. Now, she would wear a little flower or something that he knew it was her, or she could say something, and he didn't have vocal aphasia. He could hear her voice, and he knew it was coming from her, so he knew who she was at that point. But just by looking at faces, he couldn't tell. The memory for words and numbers is on the left side, and memory for shapes and music on the right side. Sequences of movements, dancing, is on the left side. Spatial interpretations on the right side. Then feelings of anxiety on the left side, emotional responsiveness to the right side. And finally, the left hemisphere is positive emotions, and the right hemisphere is negative emotions. Now, I had a student once ask me, well, if a person is left-handed, then they're using the right side of their brain in order to use their left hand, and they're in the right side of their brain, right? So the right hemisphere is the one that's active. Are those people more negative than positive emotionally? And the answer is no, that's not how it works. Just because one part of your brain is functioning one way doesn't mean that the other side of your brain can't be functioning in another way. And that's the mistake that a lot of people make. They say you're either right-brained or you're left-brained. No, we're full-brained, and there's probably no one that is all right hemisphere as opposed to left hemisphere. We move around depending on the way that our brain developed in development, which is our next chapter, is development. So when we have these two brains and there's no corpus callosum in between them, these two brains do not talk to each other. They can only talk to each other through the corpus callosum. So that's called a split brain patient. We've talked about that when it comes to epilepsy. Sometimes we'll purposely do that to save their lives. And then there are people who are born without a corpus callosum or a very small corpus callosum, and we call those people savants, and in the intelligence chapter we'll talk about those types of people. But these are individuals, people who cannot talk back and forth between their brains, individuals who have had the corpus callosum surgically severed normally, and in many cases to stop the occurrence of severe epilepsy, and that creates a duality of consciousness, a condition in which the split brain patient has separate consciousness in each hemisphere. Now, the left brain is very different than the right brain. The left brain wants to get things done. The right brain just wants to have some fun. I make that a rhyme so you can remember. The left brain wants to get things done. The right brain wants to have some fun. And they are not communicating with each other anymore, and so the right side controls the left hand. The left hand's just having a good time, and the right hand is trying to get stuff done, right? And it is kind of interesting to watch these people and to study these people who are split brain patients. That's it for the nervous system. Are there any questions about the nervous system before we go on to the endocrine system? Okay, I'm seeing lots of no's. If you do have a question, just write it down, and when I see it, I'll answer it. So the endocrine system is our hormonal system, our body's hormonal system. But there are parts of the brain that are associated with the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is the master gland that controls most of the hormones in your body, and it produces hormones itself influencing the secretion or retention of all the endocrine glands. And it produces a hormone that influences growth. You may have heard of pituitary growth hormone, and some children do not, their pituitary isn't producing it very well, so they're small in stature. And today we have been able to gather pituitary growth hormone, and we can actually inject it into children that are not growing rapidly, and we can help them to grow. It's painful, but it does make them get closer to their normal potential height that they should have been. The hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland, and the hypothalamus rules our system. It makes sure everything is in balance, that we don't have too much moisture in our body, that we have enough calories in our body, that our body is hot enough, not too cold. And it controls that by using the pituitary gland. They're connected to each other. So hormones themselves are just chemicals that are released into the bloodstream by different glands and the pituitary. Hormones are chemicals that will flow through the bloodstream and then interact with different aspects of our body. They're not like neurons. A neuron can fire off in 1/1000th of a second and make a connection and do something. Hormones have to be secreted. They have to flow through the bloodstream. When they finally reach their destination, then they can make the body do whatever is supposed to be done. And they will stay in the body and continue to activate the body's mechanisms until they are metabolized by the liver or the kidneys. So they last a long time in the body, and they take a long time to act. You may see a snake, and you may be afraid of snakes, and that's a common fear of snakes. And we'll talk about what fears are in another chapter. But fear of a snake, you see the snake, your heart starts racing, you start breathing, you start sweating, you run away from the snake. And as far away as you run, you feel like you're finally safe. The snake has taken off in the other direction, by the way. It's just as smart as you are. It doesn't like humans. So it runs in the other direction or slithers in the other direction. And when you know you're safe, the snake is nowhere around, it can't harm you, but your heartbeat is still going fast, you're breathing fast, you're still sweating, all of the different aspects of fear, because the fear is being produced by a hormone flowing through your system, and until that hormone is metabolized and taken out of your blood, it's going to continue to affect all of the systems in your body. So they are long-lasting, and they take a long time for them to actually affect the body. These are where the hormones come from: the thyroids and parathyroids, the adrenals, pancreas, ovaries, and testes. And some of the hormones that are absolutely necessary in your body to survive are T3 and T4. They come from the thyroid. Some people take synthroid, which is a synthetic form of T3, because their thyroid is not producing enough T3. And they should also be taking T4, but there's no synthetic T4 that I know of. So every cell in the body depends upon these thyroid hormones for the regulation of their metabolism. What they do is they take oxygen and calories to produce energy. You can be 100% oxygenated and have a whole bunch of calories in your system. If you don't have T3, you will die, because you can't convert the oxygen and the calories into energy without T3. So they're very, very important chemicals, and there are people who need to take a synthetic form of it called synthroid, and it's only T3 that they get. They don't get the T4, but it's enough to keep them going. The pancreas will produce insulin, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with diabetes. If you can't control your blood sugar well, then you have to take an extra insulin. And the adrenals produce glucocorticoids, and adrenaline. The adrenaline is what causes goosebumps. If you get scared and all the little hairs stand up on the little bumps on your arm, also on the back of your neck, as the goosebumps come, the hair stands up, and it's called being afraid of something. So to reduce also the inflammatory destruction of rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune diseases, we can use them to prevent the rejection of transplanted organs and to control asthma. They're also used for that purpose. So there's lots of reasons that we have these extra endocrine chemicals, that we need them throughout our bodies. The testes produce testosterone, and of course all of you probably know that when you go through puberty, then you get more testosterone in your system, or estrogen in your system if you're a woman. The testosterone growth, boys, before they go through puberty, they have a much higher speaking voice than normal, and I sound like Mickey Mouse right now, but they will talk much higher, in a higher pitch or frequency, until they get testosterone, and then they'll start to go down to their normal voice. That's typical of testosterone. It also produces much bigger skeletal muscles and skeleton as well. So your bones become denser. And for some people, they have much higher amounts of testosterone than others do. Remember, every single one of us, we tell you how we develop, we tell you what we are, but there's a spectrum from very high to very low on everything about the human body. None of us is the same exact thing. So we enlarge our larynx, and that's what causes the voice changes. And we also have growth of body hair and, of course, loss of hair in older years, and increased male sexual drive as well from testosterone. And some people have more testosterone than others. It turns out that a woman given testosterone will also have a much higher sex drive as well. They will respond exactly the same way as men will. The problem with that, however, is that they start to have a much lower voice, and they start to grow hair on their face. And so now you don't want sex with that woman. So and also it causes cancer. So there's lots of reasons why you don't want to take testosterone as a woman. And of course, there are men who lose their testosterone production as they grow older, and there are lots of commercials about creams and pills that you can take, and none of them ever tell you if you take too much, even as a male, you will develop cancer. So you have to be very careful using those products, and you should be using them or being overseen by a doctor while you're doing it. And with the creams, there's a warning on those creams that says if you have women in the household and you're using the creams, women should not touch. If you put cream on your arm, no children, no girls should be touching your arm or holding on to your arm. It will go through their skin as well and get into them and cause different issues that they shouldn't be having the testosterone at that point. So the brain regulates control amounts of these chemicals using the pituitary gland. And there are a few other extra things that I want to talk about when it comes to us as human beings and our nature. And the first one is that happiness is genetic. You know people that are happier than you are, and you wonder why you're not so happy. Well, you are happy for yourself. Don't judge yourself by other people. There's a spectrum, remember? We're not all exactly the same. And I like to show happiness as a rubber band. So if I put a rubber band around my fingers and it just fits, this is the size of the rubber band, then this is my normal level of happiness. Some people have a smaller rubber band, some people have a larger rubber band. Let's say this is the rubber band that a person has of happiness. They will vary in between this from what they think is sad to what they think is happy. And their happiness level and their sadness level are not the same as other people's because it's a big spectrum, and I could have my rubber band could be down here, another person's rubber band could be up here. Let's say I'm framing my face for this rubber band. And something happens and my spouse dies. This is the absolute psychologically worst thing that can happen to you if you like your spouse. If you don't like your spouse, I guess it's not so bad. But your spouse dies and you get stretched out, and that's into the negative direction. You feel really bad. You're now way outside of your norm. But when you stretch a rubber band, the rubber band causes force to try to pull it back in again. And within 7.5 years, the death of a spouse, you will be right back to where you were before the death of the spouse. If not, you need help. Of course, getting married is a wonderful thing, and we stay way happy because we get married. And then guess what? It still pulls you back. And by 4 years, you're back to normal. And it's not a 7-year itch like the movie says. It is a 4-year itch. If you can make it past the 4th year into the 5th year, you're doing very well in your marriage. So that's happiness. Heredity is the biological transmission of traits from generation to generation. And genetics is the study of the inheritance of physical characteristics and psychological traits that we get from our ancestors or our parents and our grandparents. Those are the ones that we're familiar with. But if you talk to your grandparents about your great-grandparents and great-great-parents, they will have stories that are kind of interesting because they will show psychological issues and devices that you see in yourself and your siblings and your parents. Men's brains we talked about already. When we talked about the size of brains, men's brains are bigger than women's brains average. I'm talking about the same sized man and the same sized woman will have larger brains in the men and less in the woman. But it turns out that women use their brain more because their brains are hotter, meaning they're being used more. So women use their brains a lot more than men do. And anyone who's married knows that. Epilepsy, we've already talked about, is very dangerous sometimes, and when it's dangerous, we will cut the brain in the corpus callosum to allow at least half of the brain not to be epileptic, and that saves the person from life-threatening conditions of epilepsy. But when we do that, we create the split brain patient, and then you have very interesting side effects because the left side and the right side can't talk to each other anymore. And usually the left side will gain control over the right side. You know, I said the left side wants to get things done. The right side likes to have some fun. And sometimes the left side will allow the right side to have its fun, but many times the left side shuts the right side down and says, we got to get this done. We got to finish our homework right now. We can't keep watching all this YouTube stuff. So one of the problems of a split brain patient, if they close their eyes so they can't see, because the information coming in from the eyes will go to both the left and right brain. If you close your eyes and I put a set of keys, right? So I put keys into the left hand. That's the right side of the brain now can actually know what it is. They can draw a picture of it, but they can't tell you the name of it because that picture cannot travel over to the left side for the left side to give you the name. If you close your eyes and put it in the right side, they'll be able to tell you what it is, keys. So that's kind of an interesting side effect of the left-right-brained person. Experimental work with lesions is done exclusively with non-human animals. We don't purposely cut the human brain to see what happens to it. We do that with animals instead, but that does give us more information about that animal's brain as well and can help us then in veterinary medicine with taking care of animals. We do cut the human brain occasionally because of cancer or because of the corpus callosum being cut for severe epilepsy that's dangerous to the patient, but we don't usually just go in and cut the brain. But the brain, while it's open for surgery, the patient can be awake, as I said, and that's how we have mapped the brain for knowing where the motor cortex is and knowing where the somatosensory cortex is And when we touch the brain in certain areas, a memory will come up. But just because we touch the brain in that area doesn't mean the same area in a different brain has a memory in it. Memories are very strange, and we haven't been able to figure them out too well yet. For instance, semantic memory, which is the memory for words and events, knowledge, that memory of a word may be in my brain in one place, but in a completely different place for another person. So when we train a computer to speak for a person, that computer's knowledge of that particular brain will not transfer to another person's brain. You can't train a computer to speak for you and then take that information and put it cap on another person. That person won't have the same reactions in their brain for their words. And that's it for this particular section. Are there any questions about the brain before I go on to development? Was that a cool unit? Did you guys like that unit? Was there something in there that went, woo, that was cool. That was like way out of there. Nobody liked that unit? Well, it is the biology unit, and this is psychology, not biology. But if you're taking physiology right now, we're pretty much going step in with your physiology class. All right, so the next one will be, where's my share? The lifespan development chapter. Can you see the lifespan? Okay, good. This is called lifespan development because we're going to start from conception and go to death. So it's the entire lifespan. And yes, conception is the very beginning of development because when the sperm enters the egg changes itself so that no other sperm can get in. So that's a developmental process, is the very beginning of development. This is generalized, and most lifespan development courses are generalized. If you go on in development or psychology or biology in college at the university level, when you get to your junior and senior courses, you will have different types of development classes in childhood development or in prenatal development or in senior or in adolescence. There'll be very specific classes that go way more in depth than what we're going to do in this particular chapter. So welcome to lifespan development. Developmental psychology is the study of how organisms change over time, and this is as a result of their biological, their genetics working out like a program, and their environmental influences over that program, the interactions between the two. The interaction is the process by which forces work together or influence each other. And then, as an example, we've already talked about Down syndrome babies with a loving family turn out to be tax-paying, working members of society, but if they're placed in an institution as they were in the old days, they were worthless, nothing. They couldn't do anything. And of course, if you're not given all of the education you need, all the nutrition, all the love and caring you need, then you're not going to reach your potential. And yes, a Down syndrome child has a lowered potential than a normal child does, but that doesn't mean that the normal child is going to be better than they are in the end result, because they may not reach their potential. They may be well below their potential based on their environment, and the Down's child may be at their highest potential. So development is a process of growth and change brought about by an interaction of heredity and the environment, and this, of course, feeds the nature-nurture controversy. This nature-nurture controversy has in the past been one where like the structuralists and functionalists, it's all nature or it's all nurture. And there was a doctor who worked at Johns Hopkins in Maryland named Dr. Money. I know, it's like Dr. Money. That's just great. What a name. But he believed it was all nurture, that nature had nothing to do with it. It was all nurturing. Nurturing was the be-all and end-all. And there were twins in Canada that were born, twin boys. And those twin boys went in for circumcisions, and the scalpel they used was an electric scalpel. It uses electricity instead of a blade. It uses electricity to cut with. And the person that was using the electrical scalpel had no knowledge of it, had never used it before, and turned it up so high that it burnt the first child's penis right off, just burnt it to a crisp. And they're like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? And Dr. Money heard about this and contacted them, and he made it his experiment. And he told them, you now have a boy and a girl. Dress the child in a dress instead of pants. Let the child's hair grow long. Give the child Barbie dolls and easy bake ovens, and teach the child as a girl, and that child will be a girl. And you can read this book. It's in the library, and there's a documentary also called As Nature Made Him, the Boy Who Was Raised as a Girl. He was wrong. He was very wrong. And the boy eventually turned himself back into a boy, but the whole family was destroyed by this experiment, and Dr. Money lost his position at Johns Hopkins because of that. And it is not all one or the other. It's a combination of both. Most scientists agree then now that there is an interaction between nature and nurture. Heredity establishes your potential. Here's what you could be. And then nurturing decides how much of that potential you're going to reach. You'll never reach above whatever your potential is that's set by your genes. But there is some leeway down here that you're never going to reach your potential, or you might reach your potential, depending on what happens in your environment. So environment helps to determine how much of that potential you will realize. But the question still is, it isn't anymore, it's all nature, all nurture, but which one's more important, nature or nurture? And that really depends on what you're talking about. Is your hair color ever going to change? No. Is your eye color ever going to change? Well, if you put contacts in that have colored contacts, yeah, but your eye color really didn't change. Is your skin color going to change? Yeah, if you get out in the sun, but as soon as you get out of the sun for a long period of time, it's going to revert back to your skin color, whatever your skin color is. So those three things, hair color, eye color, skin color, are not going to be changed by the environment. That's going to be your color for the rest of your life, unless you modify it differently, but then the roots are still going to show up, as many women find out after coloring their hairs. So there is actually a loose association between your birth order and your personality. How many of you are firstborns? Put down a firstborn if you're a firstborn. I was firstborn. There I have one. Lauren was firstborn. Ava's firstborn. Oh, and of those who are firstborn, are you an only child, or do you have siblings? Put only child if you're an only child. So for 3 years, I was an only child. I was the only one in my house. Caitlin, you know what it's like. Caitlin's an only child. My wife was an only child. She used to try to blame things on the dog, but she was the one that was responsible. I was the only child for 3 years. I was the king of the household until my sister was born. And then I had to learn to share. But my sister never had the option of knowing she was the only child because she had to share stuff with me. Now, she was the queen of the house and I was the king of the house still, sort of. You know, I was still the firstborn man and she was still the firstborn woman of the house. But then my second sister came along, the third child, and she never knew. She wasn't or the queen. She wasn't even a princess. She was just a wear and tear. And then my other sister came along 22 years later because my father got remarried after he divorced my mom. And I have a sister oh man, she's 28 now and I'm 63. So how old is the difference between them? We used to go out shopping, I'd take her out shopping with me. And people thought that she was my daughter. You know? And I'd go, no, she's not my daughter. Oh, your granddaughter. I'm like, granddaughter? Do I look that old? So, no, she's my sister. So birth order changes your personality. Amazingly, because of the experiences you have and that the other children did not have. My youngest sister, not my second sister, not my third sister, my second sister, she got away with all kinds of stuff that my sister and I couldn't get away with because my mom and dad were on us all the time. But by the time she came along, which was 6 years after I was born, they were worn out. So she got to do all kinds of stuff that we would have been grounded for. So there is a difference in the way that your parents treat you depending on when you were born, how you're born, in what relationship. And there's a whole personality theory based on your position in birth. Of course, my sister has 8 children, and my grandmother was the last of 18 children, all from the same woman. When we get together with my cousins and second cousins and aunts and uncles, and we take a warehouse to cut together, it's like there's a large family there. And some of you may have large families also. My wife and I, we never had a child. We didn't, so 26 years of marriage. So 2 years ago, we adopted a child, and she's now 12, and she's a joy. And my wife has said, we have another bedroom. We could have another, we could adopt another child. And I'm like, no, at 63, I don't need another child in the house. One is enough. It's driving me crazy. I know all about development. I know how children are supposed to develop, and I've taught it for many, many years. And it's probably a good reason to have a child. But we don't tell anybody how hard it is to raise children, and it is difficult to raise children. It is not an easy task. If you're a parent, God bless you. If you're a child, bless your parents for putting up with all kinds of pain and suffering. So, twin studies I've already talked about. This is how we deal with the difference between nature and nurture. We can figure it out through twin studies. So developmental investigations in which twins, especially the identical twins, are compared in the search for the genetic and environmental effects. Twins are more similar, as we find out, than other siblings on the measures of intelligence, personality, and interests. So we can test the twins, but we also test their biological parents, if we can still get a hold of them, and the parents that raised them. So we can see how close they are to their sires. I'll call the sires the ones who actually gave them birth, and their parents, their sires and their parents, and how close they are between the two of them. And usually they'll fall somewhere in between them, but are they closer to their parents or are they closer to their sires? It's kind of an interesting analysis that can be done. So we say these traits are, the traits that are the same between them are highly canalized. The word canalization means the amount that the genotype is resistant to the environment. Your hair, your eye, and your skin colors are highly resistant. It does not matter what the environment is. Your hair color, eye color, and skin color will stay the same. Extremely canalized genes. But there are not very many of those genes. And the more genes you have in the development of a particular trait, the more environment can play a part to it. So weakly canalized genes are the genes that are easily adapted by the environment. And we can say that from tests that genetics accounts for between 20 and 60% of your verbal, spatial, and perceptual abilities. So these adoption studies are studies in which the adopted child's characteristics are compared to their biological family and their adopted family. And these adopted children may be twins or may simply be siblings that were separated at birth, that we're trying to determine what is the closest to their biological or to their sires or to their actual parents. And through these studies, we know that heredity can play a role in a variety of different mental disorders. So here we are back at biology connecting to your psychology or psychological makeup. Alcoholism, Alzheimer's disease, schizophrenia, depression, and panic disorder all are connected through heredity. If your parents are alcoholics, there is a chance, a greater chance, that you will be an alcoholic than the normal population of people who don't have alcoholics as parents. Schizophrenia is the same way, and we'll actually talk about schizophrenia, depression, and panic disorder when we get to the pathology section. But alcohol is a big one, and we'll talk about alcohol numerous times because alcohol gets in the way of thought processes, certainly, but also gets in the way of development. It causes major problems in development if a fetus is exposed to alcohol in the womb. So don't discount the environment's ability to improve a condition. You may have a higher chance of having alcoholism or schizophrenia, but it doesn't mean you're going to have it. Nature and nurture continue to produce changes in personality and mental processes as well as physical changes throughout their lifespan, and that's why we study it, hoping that we will be able to determine what we can expect of a child growing into adulthood and as an adult going into his senior years. What can we expect of a person and what is outside the norm of a human being? Then we have an argument here as well because some psychologists believe and biologists believe that change occurs in a very gradual manner. And others believe it is a big deal. You change and then you're don't change for a while. Oh, there's another change, and oh, there's another change. And there's a big controversy of which one is it? Is it a continuous or discontinuous change? And I think, again, just like any other nature, nurture, or the structuralists and functionalists, it's a really crazy argument because it's both. And it's really easy to see this in puberty. We know that you're not in puberty and then all of a sudden you are. 12 for girls, 13 for boys. Most of the time you'll see puberty begin. 12 for girls, 13 for boys. And it's quite obvious. They were not in puberty and now they are in puberty. That gives credence to the discontinuity view. However, if you start at 8 years of age and start taking blood tests every month, you will see hormones in the blood begin to build up and build up and build up slowly over time until in girls at the age of 12 and at boys at the age of 13, those hormones hit a level where the body reacts to those hormones. So was it continuous or was it discontinuous? Who cares as long as you can discuss and describe what puberty is? Another strange argument in psychology. The continuity view says that development is gradual and continuous, and there are people that will scream and holler and yell about how things are continuous. And the discontinuity view says that development proceeds in uneven steps. So these developmental stages that they're always talking about will be the periods of life initiated by significant transitions or changes in physical or psychological functioning. And that is, puberty is a really good example of it that everybody's familiar with. Some development is caused by self-fulfilling prophecies. Remember, we talked about the self-fulfilling prophecies. If you think you're going to do badly in a class and you say, I'm not going to pass this class, so you don't study for the tests, then you're not going to pass the class. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You did exactly what was necessary not to pass the class. And parents will look at their child and say, the newborn child, our child is very shy. Isn't our child shy? Our child is shy. We're going to protect our child and keep our child from getting into situations that will cause them anxiety because they're shy children. And they create a shy child through their particular behaviors. So it is very possible for your parents to produce a particular psychological trait in you just because of the way that they reacted to you as a child. While psychological traits are formed by the interaction of heredity and environment, many traits have a very strong genetic influence, as we find through the studies. Genetics can have an overwhelming influence on development and behavior. Panic disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, and antisocial personality and Tourette's syndrome are all linked to very specific genes. So we know that there are genetic reasons for these to happen. The question is, how much can environment help these particular traits? And of course, in Tourette's syndrome, it's a genetic predisposition to Tourette's. What happens most likely is that the brain mechanisms that in most of us are inhibitory, where we're told, don't you ever say that four-letter word again, and so our brain inhibits the saying of those particular words, four-letter words, right? Like love. Yes, love is a four-letter word. Four-letter words we're not supposed to say, a lot of them. But in Tourette's, you say, don't you ever say that word again, and instead of the inhibitory process, they have an excitatory. Instead of GABA, they have glutamine instead, and so they say the word because they have no way of stopping themselves. As soon as they think, don't say that word, their excitatory impulse goes and they say the word. So what can we do about that? Well, we can have knowledge of the fact these people have Tourette's and accept the fact that they do and help them any way we can to survive in our world so that they can, because their brains are in perfect shape, other than that, they can still be scientists, mathematicians, they can be teachers, they can do all kinds of things. They're not stuck with this particular problem causing a non-intelligence. They do have intelligence. So we need to find ways to help them to fit into the world that we have. Maybe they're best in a situation where they're in their own little cubicles instead of being out amongst all the other workers. And that way it won't be a problem for them saying their words that they think and say without any control over. We'll talk about antisocial personalities in the pathology section. These are the people that are real dangerous and need to be controlled and placed into sanitariums or prisons long term because they are because they're dangerous to society. Panic disorders and obsessive compulsive, we'll talk about those as well in the pathology section. Something to look forward to. The development of Down syndrome, we've already talked about. Children can sometimes be measurably improved through learning behavior modification techniques. And we also know when we're talking about the genetics and the environment that genetics is not the be-all and end-all. Every land vertebrate, not the vertebrates that live in the ocean, but land vertebrates, has been cloned except for a human being. We don't clone human beings. It's against our morals and ethics. And the societies on Earth that have the capability of doing it are of the same thought process, that it is against our morals and ethics to do that. There are some societies, I believe, that if they had the potential, they would do it. I believe North Korea would have no problem taking their strongest soldier and cloning their strongest soldier over and over again. Clone wars. But we have cloned horses, cows, sheep, goats, and cats and dogs. The first animal that was successfully cloned was Dolly the lamb, and Dolly looked like her mother and acted like her mother. The first cat that was cloned was Cece. Cece, copycat, copycat. Or a carbon copy, I guess you could say also. But Cece's mother was Rainbow. Rainbow was a calico cat, numerous colors. Cece was a clone and looked nothing like her mother and acted nothing like her mother. And this just freaked out the scientists who were doing this. That's not the way it's supposed to work. What's wrong with cats? Did we do this wrong? Did we take the wrong material? So they redid the experiment numerous times to take a cell from Rainbow, the mother, take out the chromosomes, take an egg from the mother, take the chromosomes out of the egg and put the other chromosomes into the egg. Now this egg has an exact copy of Rainbow's chromosomes, and it implants and starts to grow into a new cat, a copy of Rainbow. But it doesn't necessarily look like Rainbow or act like Rainbow. And here's where heredity and environment, you can see the environmental influences. And what they finally discovered was the genes for hair. There are multiple genes for hair. And remember, the more genes you have, the more chance the environment has to play a role. There's lots of different genes for hair color in a cat. And the genes are not necessarily all active. Depending on the temperature of the womb, certain genes will be active in hot and certain genes will be active in cold. And if you have a female fetus and a female fetus with a male fetus in between, the estrogen from these two females sort of merges into that male cat will be more female-like than a cat that is between two males. And a female cat in between two males will be more masculine than feminine when you have three females together. I have Callie, my cat, that's in this room with me because she's not domesticated yet. We've had her for 1.5 years and she refuses to domesticate, so I have stuck her in a room and I basically live in this room with her so she will get used to me. But she just doesn't like to be touched. I've gotten to the point now where I can scratch her under the chin a little bit and she'll eat out of my hand now, but she's still not the petting kind of cat. But she had 3 babies when we first brought her into the house, and all 3 of those babies like to lay in your lap and they curl up and they purr while you're petting on them. Cece was born in a laboratory with all humans all taking care of her and touching her and all the time. Rainbow, her mother, had been in a pound, had been found on the street, had been in the pound. They got her out of the pound, so she didn't like humans very much. So there's a very big difference in their personalities because of the environments that they lived in. So hopefully you can see that. I hope you can get that through your heads. So genetics offers a basic plan, and then in many cases, environment can modify that plan. We start development, as I said, as soon as we are conceived physically, not mentally. As soon as the egg and the sperm meet, the egg changes so that no other sperm can get into it. That is a developmental process, development beginning immediately. That particular new cell that now has a full complement of chromosomes, some hopefully full complement. We've already talked about the fact that it may not have a total complement, or it may have more than it's supposed to have. But that particular new cell is no longer an egg. It's not a sperm. It's called a zygote. One cell, you can't see it with the human eye. You need a microscope to be able to see it. And scientists will study the zygote, which then turns into an embryo and then a fetus. The first three ways to look at a growing human being. Most of the changes in your life are going to happen in this first 9 months because you go from a single cell to a mega millions of cells organism that can survive outside of the womb on its own. So this prenatal period is a very important period of your life. The zygote, as I said, is a fertilized egg, and the egg then the zygote then grows into 2 identical cells, and then 4 identical cells, then 8 identical cells, 16 identical cells is next, 32 identical cells is next, and 64, and then 128 within 5 days. Within 5 days, you are at what's called the blastocyst stage. And that blastocyst stage at 128 cells is what implants. But in the first day, we go from the zygote to the new embryo, growing embryo. From day 1 to about 8 weeks, which is about 56 days of growth, we call this organism an embryo. And its heart begins to beat in that time period, because when you're at this stage of 128 cells or more, then you can't get all the nutrients and oxygen you need just from your environment. You're a deep-seated cell somewhere here inside of this growing form. You need oxygen. You need all of the nutrients. So it's the circulatory system that gets it to you. If the circulatory system doesn't work, then you're dead. And if you die and all the other cells die, then the cells never get to full maturity. And it turns out that only 1/3 of zygotes ever get to the fetus stage. Only 1/3 of zygotes ever get to the fetus stage for numerous reasons. And many times women blame themselves for a miscarriage, and it has nothing to do with anything you did. It just is a miscarriage. It's just there was something wrong in the developmental process. Nothing that you could have done about it. So this blastocyst stage, 128-day stage, 128 cells, is like a tennis ball. It's hollow in the middle with all the cells on the outside, and that is by about day 5. And it implants, that's what implants, and begins to grow into the creature, human being or cow or sheep or dog, whatever it's going to be, in the womb. So that implantation process happens by day 7 to 9 in the process. So differentiation is when all these 128 cells, then they've implanted, the tennis ball has implanted, and now it has to become the human being that you are. How do all these cells figure out they're going to be a nose cell or an ear cell or eye cells or lip cells or skin cells or heart or liver or lungs and end up in the right place at the right time so that you are a fully functioning human being when it's over? And that differentiation process, we call them stem cells. Every single one of those cells is a stem cell. They can be anything. And I've already told you that we now can take a stem cell and we can make it into a liver cell or a heart cell or a muscle cell. And it's just recently that people have been able to change them into nerve cells. If they can successfully create a nerve cell, oh my gosh, what they can do with the brain at that point, and to replace nerves that are damaged in the arm that won't heal properly. There's a whole revolution of medicine coming down the pike if they can do that. The fetus is from 9 weeks until birth, and I said only 33% of zygotes will ever make it to birth. The other 66, there's something that was just wrong, and it will never finish the development phases. The placenta is the part of the baby that connects the mother and the baby together, where nutrients will go through there, oxygen gets to the baby. They're not breathing in the womb because there's amniotic fluid in the womb. So they're not breathing the water. Although their lungs are sort of going in and out, they're not getting oxygen that way. They're getting oxygen through their blood, through the placenta. The placenta also protects the baby from certain chemicals that might come through, so it stops those chemicals from getting through to damage the baby. But there are certain chemicals that do get through the placenta and damage the growing organism, and they're called teratogens. Teratogens will damage the developmental process, but the genetics of that baby are fine. That baby should have grown perfectly if it wasn't for the teratogens. And two major teratogens are nicotine and alcohol. Nicotine causes a baby to have low birth weight, and low birth weight is bad for the child's developmental process. Low birth weight has lots of other problems that are associated with the fact that they're low birth weight. And alcohol produces fetal alcohol syndrome and SIDS, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But those babies that have been damaged by teratogens can still have perfectly fine children themselves once they go into adulthood. They may have all kinds of issues because of the teratogen, but their genetics is fine. It's like a train that leaves Hampton Roads going for New York and somebody threw the switch wrong and it ended up in Chicago. It's not supposed to be in Chicago, but it's a perfectly good train and it can function again. It can come back down to Hampton Roads and pick up people and go back up to New York where it's supposed to go. Human beings that have had something go wrong with their developmental process, as long as their genetics are fine, can in the future have perfectly okay children. Even a Down syndrome child who has genetics that are wrong can have perfectly fine children. But mutagens, when you have a mutation of your genes, that mutation can pass to the next generation and the next and the next and the next, on down the line for hundreds of generations until they just die out. So let's talk about some teratogens. So first of all, nicotine and alcohol, right? I've already told you what nicotine does. It produces a low birth weight child. Alcohol produces something called fetal alcohol syndrome, and that produces a slight deviation in the way that the face looks. You can tell that a baby has fetal alcohol syndrome from their facial abnormalities. It is greatest when alcohol is consumed in the first 2 months of pregnancy. How many women know they're pregnant in the first month, in the first day? And if they are out having a good time drinking alcohol for that first month, they are washing that baby in alcohol through the placenta. And anyone knows If you are trying to walk a straight line and you're drunk, you can't walk a straight line. The same thing is true of your brain cells. If your brain cells are supposed to be somewhere and they have to get there and they're drunk, they may not get there. So most women don't know that they're pregnant during this first 2 periods. So if you are active, and you know what I mean by that, and you are not protecting yourself, then you should not be drinking. If you are taking pregnancy medication to keep from being pregnant, and you are also sick and the doctor gives you antibiotics, those pill, patch, shot, whatever it is you're taking, are useless. The antibiotics and that anti-pregnancy medication, they interact with each other, and you are just as easily as if you are not taking any of that medication at all, you can get pregnant. I even had a nurse once in one of my classes that, oh, yeah, that's how you got pregnant. So every drink increases the probability of these issues, and more than 3 at one sitting is devastating. More than 3 drinks at one sitting is called binge drinking. A lot of people say that you can take 1 glass of wine. Wine does not have as much alcohol in it as the hard liquors do. And 1 glass of alcohol, meaning 1 8-ounce glass of wine, is okay. And yet there's still some studies that don't show that. So it's like Russian roulette. If you are drinking, you know what Russian roulette is? You take a 6-shooter, has 6 bullets in it. You take out 5 of the bullets, leave 1 bullet in, spin the thing, put it up to your head, and pull the trigger. And if the bullet wasn't in that particular chamber that's coming up, then you win. What a stupid game. That's what you're doing to your children if you're drinking and you have the potential of being pregnant. SIDS is called Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. That's what SIDS stands for. And it's when a baby dies in the first year for no reason at all. You can't tell what it was that caused the reason for that person to die. And it looks like suffocation. And the American Indians have the highest situation of SIDS. And the reason that they went in and they asked the mothers that had children that died in the first year to tell them what they were doing during their pregnancy, and most of the ones that had SIDS, children, were binge drinkers. And that's how we correlate. Because we don't take 50 women and give them alcohol that are pregnant, 50 women and don't give them alcohol, and 50 women and give them wine, glasses of wine, 1 glass of wine to see if they get SIDS or not. We can't do that. That's not causation. We don't say it causes it. We say it's correlated very significantly with alcohol. And thalidomide, I was very lucky. 1957 is when I was born, 1957. In 1957, in Europe, in Spain and France and England, there was a drug that had been tested for 3 months, idiotic. They had been tested for 3 months to show that women could take this drug and it wouldn't cause any problems for them and they would not have morning sickness. And it worked. They did not have morning sickness. And this company came to the United States and said, we want to sell this in the United States, and here's all the European data. And the FDA said, no, you have to do the studies here in the United States. We don't take the European data. You have to do our studies here in the United States. So they started the studies in the United States, and within 6 months, the babies were being born in Europe with no arms and no legs, caused by the ingestion of thalidomide. They had hands and they had feet because thalidomide stopped the creation of the limbs. It didn't stop the creation of the feet and the hands. So they had a torso with hands on them and feet on them, but no arms and legs. And they're called flipper babies because of that. And that was 1957. So thank God for the FDA, because I could have been one of those. My mom might have taken thalidomide so she didn't have morning sickness. The highest probability of causes of rubella, problems with rubella, occur in weeks 8 through 12. That's when things are happening in the developmental process that rubella tends to get in the way of. And they include the vision process, so vision loss or blindness, hearing loss, heart defects, mental retardation, and less frequently movement disorders. And there are two other teratogens, which we'll talk about when we come back. They are syphilis, which is an STD, sexually transmitted disease, and toxoplasmosis, which you get from cats. I want you to ruminate on that for a little while, and I'll see you on Thursday. If you were here and you haven't typed in my name, I'm here, then do that right away. Otherwise, I'll see you later. See you on Thursday. And if you want to stick around and talk, that's fine. I'll be here. You can either type in a question or you can talk to me by unmuting yourself. So, bye.